not working today, don't complain. Hank and I both come from radio, so there can't be any feedback problems, none of that good stuff. Okay, y'all have his bio in front of you, right? His little, background, whatever. I'm doing the off-the-record Hank Moore introduction. We've known each other, 40 years, maybe? Something like that? I've been out of radio 32, so I don't know. The thing I hate about you, Hank, if I could write a book with all my BBB stories, first of all, I would end up in a shallow grave somewhere. I couldn't do what he has done here. I want to say something also about the Asian Chamber. Linda did a very nice introduction. We have actually 8,300 members. Believe me, I count every day. And we only have one Chamber of Commerce that sits on our board of 50, and it's this one. So that does mean a lot to us. I have Beth Wolf, a former board member here. I have Mr. Frog, whose company we do business with. How about a little intimidation for me getting up here today? Hank's got this book, and it's about Houston legends, and I'm in it. And a couple of months back, years now, I guess, when he called and asked for some comments, I mentioned, I had to pause, like I did last night about this introduction. And, I called Hank a Renaissance man. I think that's a good thing, but it could also mean that, you lived 500 years ago, you cut your ear off, and you're crazy. But if all business in my city thought like he did, had the ability to make a rapport with business, I would have a boring job. Unfortunately, they don't all think that way. So I came back and I was kind of looking at his background, what he's done with this book, and I want to pin Hank in two areas before we bring him up here. He's either a drug dealer or a weaver. The people who do the cloth. Let's get the drug dealer part out of the way. It's the incestuous high of seeing famous folks that you've always wondered about. You've always wanted to know the story. Let's face it, we're in that kind of a culture. And he has committed his life to doing that and putting it in here. The fact that I'm in it, it's kind of nice too. Thanks, Hank. But it's a great book, and that's the drug dealer part. He's giving you your little street level high. The weaver part is so important, and I'm glad I have people who've been in government service, who work with other business associations, with our transit authority. One of the criticisms we have about Houston is we lose our identity. We move so quickly. I'm going to shock y'all with something. I've been around here a long time. I'm not only not a Texan, I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm not only a Yankee, I'm a foreigner. I still have my dual citizenship. I need to talk to Congressman Cruz about how you do that, but I can't. I still haven't. When I came to Texas, one of the things I learned very quickly, and working in the media did it for me, is you don't try to change the culture that's here, you absorb it and you bring your experiences from elsewhere. So the weaver part of Mr. Hank Moore will be weaving a thread of history for us, so that someday when this is sitting in the library, or his book's already being used in universities, there is a record of the city. That's what I read last night. And you kept me up awful late reading the book, but it was extremely good. So, I want to introduce my friend of many years, former media survivor. You'll hear some of that today, I'm sure. Hank Moore. Please give him a big applause.
Thank you. This is my third time to be the speaker for this chamber. As you know, the last time I was here, we were introducing new board members, as I recall. It was in November a couple of years ago, and I was talking about business since the recession and how we're moving forward, although I'm still predicting the next recession in 10 years, but small business is going to keep it from happening. Corporate America is wanting really hard to keep their heads in the sand and get back to business the way it used to be. And one thing that the Asian Chamber knows, and that every company exemplified here knows, is change has to happen every single day. And change, on the one hand, may have some problems associated with it, but it's always opportunity, right? It's all about opportunity. All of us are immigrants from somewhere. Dan Parsons came from Canada. I came from a little hole in the road called Austin, Texas. And it really was a hole in the road. It was 50,000 population at the time. And it was about 200 when I left. And this particular community, which we're here to talk about, we're here to celebrate 200 years of Houston history. Some of us have lived part of it. Most of us are relatively new to the history, and guess what? Every one of you who is new to the history is probably going to want to learn more about it because the past does repeat itself. As my old friend in the music days, Sonny Bono, once said, the beat goes on. When I was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in 1992, Sonny and Cher had introduced me, and the previous time I'd worked with them was 25 years earlier as a MC at their movie premiere at the Paramount Theater in Austin, Texas. So history does have a way of coming back, and the more that we learn from history, we will not only not repeat the mistakes of history, but we'll get the best. I have 4 trademark concepts of business. One of them, of course, is the business tree, which most of you know about. One of them is called yesterdayism. And it talks about how we go in and creatively learn from the past. And sometimes the old ideas with a new coat of paint become the new strategies, the new technologies, and we also understand how the old technology still developed. When Dan and I used to work in radio, we were still playing records at 3 speeds, 45, 33, and 78 RPM. And those people who work, you could either slip cue, you could back cue. There's different ways of cueing records, and that's why they all started with what we call a cue burn. And then the records. People don't know this stuff today.
There'll be a test.
That's right. By the way, this building has interesting history. I'm going to get into Houston history. I'm not here to talk about the corporate scandals. I've talked about all that stuff ad nauseum. This one is from the heart. This is not about the money, this particular book. This is about preserving the history of people and their contributions, some of whom I'm getting ready to introduce to you because some of the living legends of Houston are here. And there are others that wanted to be here today. My good friend George Strake is at the Center for Public Policy in Austin, and he was hoping they would cancel that meeting, but they didn't. And he wanted to be here, and Ernie Cockrell wanted to be here. Wei Lee wanted to be here, but he's in China right now doing business, and that's what he does well. When I grew up, or as Dan said, in the shadow of a bunch of legends. I started working when I was 10 years old. Most of you have heard that part of the story. I was a radio DJ in a little town called Austin, Texas. I wanted to be Dick Clark, and my then 24-year-old mentor named Bill Moyers pulled me aside and said, suck it up, kid. You can't go through life as a carbon copy of someone else. You need to be one of a kind. You can like the entertainment world, but you don't have to live in it. You can like history, but you don't have to live in it. But you do need to learn from it. So I took that to heart. And then in those years that I worked in the White House, those 5 years with the Johnson administration, I got the pleasure of meeting some of the living legends of the world. Winston Churchill, Eleanor Roosevelt, on and on and on and on. And I used to meet a lot of the legends of Texas because of the parties they throw. And no one threw better parties than Lady Bird Johnson. She was like a second mother. And I got to meet some of the legends of Houston for the first time. I'm a Hog, Jar Jar Brown, the Mastersons, the Worthams. They were all there. The only one of the old guard that I never met was Jesse Jones. He was a little bit before my time. And when I moved here, I was the ripe old age of 25 years old. I'd already gone through my White House career. I'd done all that. I'd just gotten my MBA. And a good friend of mine named Dr. Norman Hackerman said, you need to move to Houston and you need to advise the University of Houston. I'm talking about stuff now people don't know that I did because I'm always talking about the global business stuff. But when you're in Houston, you are a citizen of the city, of the world. All of us came from somewhere else. We are all minorities, therefore we are majority, right? We are the purveyors of opportunity. You can think and feel and be anything that you want. And when Dr. Hackerman sent me here, my first job, I was supposed to advise the University of Houston in creating the University of System. And a lot of the people who were on the Board of Regents, suddenly I was their mentor. Mrs. Linda Wortham was 70 years old, and I was 25, and I was her mentor. You can be a mentor at any age, right? Bill Moyers had been mine. Those of us who still watch Bill Moyers on PBS, that's that Bill Moyers. But he was young once. I was taught to be a young, wise owl. And if you are a young person mentoring the older people, you are wiser. So one of the great opportunities of this city is an age opportunity. Young people are the future, can be, always have been. There have been young people that created the community. Jesse Jones, the Allen brothers, Sam Houston, all those ancient names. Now I'm going to talk about the names in the last 100 years. I was first suggested to me that I write this book 41 years ago by Mrs. Wortham and Mrs. Hobby and George Mitchell and people like that. Everybody hears these names and you read them on buildings, right? There's a chapter in my book about that called Streets, Buildings, and Programs, and you hear what everything was named for. But these were real people. And when you're sitting there with these folks, they were the classiest group of individuals you'd ever want to meet. Some of them are here right now. And they would treat you like $1 million, which made you want to treat them like $1 million. I was taught as a very young person, I really was young once, really I was the boy wonder the first 35 years of my career, and suddenly I got old. But so did Dick Clark, right? He was America's oldest teenager, and my whole goal in life when I started my career in 1958 was to be America's second oldest teenager. So that's okay. When you're in the presence of greatness, what happens? You rise not only to the occasion, but above it. You become friends and confidants of the great. You are the mentors to your customer base. Normally in my business talk at this point, I would be talking about stakeholders and customer-focused management and all that good stuff. In the community involvement is the backbone of everything. And what I learned very quickly as a 25-year-old mentor to these wise old owls from River Oaks, the ones with all the money, their ears were wide open and they're always wanting to know, what do you think? What do you believe? What can we do different? How can we change the community? I remember one time sitting around, and next thing you know, you're on committees with all these people. You're serving on boards, you're going to charity meetings, and that's the great leveling stabilizer of the community. You know, when everybody volunteers with the Asian Chamber and is involved on an active committee stature and becomes officers, then those who give the most tend to get the most back. In one of my previous books, The Business Tree, I referred to that as potlash, P-O-T-L-A-C-H-E. It's a Native American term, and it means the giving of gifts. I give you something, and what I get back from you is of infinitely greater value. So when people mentor others, their acquisition of wisdom then becomes your reward. In later years, one of my other presidents I advised, of course, was George H.W. Bush. And when we created the 1,000 Points of Light program, the premise was you thank people for doing a good job in service to the community. And guess what happens? They're so darn proud, they're going to want to do more. And for those corporations represented here, such as Metro and some of the others that are involved with the chamber, the corporate sponsors of the chamber, Shell and all of those characters, every one of them have done essentially a lot of the right things. Now, none of us are in business to give everything away, but when we do community work, it has to count. So I came down here as an advisor, and Mrs. Wortham first planted the idea of a book on Houston in my brain in 1974. And that was a long time ago, before half the people in this room were born. And that's okay, you know, there's 5 generations in the workforce right now, and all of us bring wonderful qualities. I've written 7 or 8 books, and every one of them is written for those 2 youngest generations in the workforce so that they don't necessarily make the same mistakes that the other guys did at one time. I'm biting my tongue not to say the word I'm trying not to say. There's one word that's not in this book, and it's Enron. We don't go there, not in this book. I go there enough other times. I testified before Congress on that subject. Anyway, this is a Hearts and Flowers book. Mrs. Wortham and Mrs. Hobby and the Mastersons and all these people were so nice, I couldn't let them not be remembered. I was aghast. If you were to go down to the wonderful library and look at what they've got down there, you'd see about 100 coffee table books with pictures of covered wagons and old buildings, and you hear all about people from the 1800s, and that's great, but you'd never read names like Ben Love and some of the others that I just thought needed to be remembered. So after enough years went by, I thought, well, I guess I better do it. And I was working on another book, which I'm still working on. I have to remember the current title of it. The current title of it is American Pop Icons and Business Legends. That's the next national book. All my other books have been national books. This one's local, this one's for the heart. And one of the byproducts will probably be a Houston Legends Foundation. George Strake is already interested in that, and Ernie Cockrell, a 501c3. And now, when I first moved here, I met some of the most interesting people in the world, and I want to introduce them to you. Felix Fraga was one of the first people I met in 1973, and he introduced me to a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant on Navigation Boulevard called Nympha's. And Lorenzo is in the book, of course. There is a restaurant section in the retail chapter. There's an energy chapter, there's an arts chapter, there's a medical science and technology chapter, there's a sports chapter. There are several others. Every aspect, there is a nonprofit chapter, community and quality of life. And a couple of people I'm getting ready to introduce are in it. Felix was a kid growing up in the shadows of Ripley House, and ultimately became the boss there, ran it as one of the premier community service centers in the world, and it's operated by Neighborhood Centers, which in itself is a fabulous umbrella agency. They're just by themselves in the book. Founded in 1907, great public trust. Felix then, at the request of many citizens, was asked to run for the HISD school board. He did great yeoman service on that. Then he was elected to the Houston City Council, and he's still involved with Neighborhood Centers. He's one of the godfathers of our community. Please welcome the Honorable Felix Fraga. One of the people that I heard about years before I met her, Martha Wong, she didn't even, I didn't know who I was back then. She and Beth Wolf and I got to know each other in Leadership Houston back in the 80s. One of the best things I ever did in my life. Linda Toyota was later the president of Leadership Houston, deservedly, did a great job. And Martha is a career-long educator, one of the best that there is in the world. And one of the things that I respected about Martha, many of the things, was she, as a principal of a school over in Meyerland, went door-to-door canvassing to get people to give public education another chance. She then had a very distinguished career with Houston Community College, and then by popular demand of the community ran for office, and she served. I remember hosting Martha Wong's very first fundraising coffee at my house, and she ran for the District C Council. She was my council member for 3 terms, and then she later was elected to the state legislature. Would you please welcome the Honorable Martha Wong. And some great contributions. And the best part is each of these folks are indicative of the role model stature of the Jesse Joneses and the Ima Hoggs and some of those people. One day I was about 28 years old, and I'd been hanging around some of the rich and powerful for a few years, and I was still young then, and this nice older gentleman leans over to me, and most of you probably see his name on a building every day. His name was George R. Brown. And his company was Brown and Root. And he said to me, a 28-year-old, I guess I was at the time, we were sitting around having lunch at the Houston Club, the old Houston Club downtown, and he said, I want you to advise me, because if people trust you, then they want to do business with you, and they serve on charity committees and all of that. That's there's a whole chapter in the book about that, how to make yourself a legend, which makes your company more valuable. There's another chapter in my business tree book on that same subject, similar. The business leader is community leader. I don't duplicate anything from books. But anyway, he leans over to me and he says, I want you to start up a business. You just tell me what you want to do for my company and we'll do it. How many people give a consultant carte blanche to do anything they want? So I go back and I go into his management meeting and I tell them that I'm going to help them set up a daycare center. And people went, say, what? Daycare? What does that have to do with business? And I said, everything. We're talking about productivity of workers. We're talking about loyalty. And that's what happened. And I was able to pull in some of my friends from neighborhood centers to help operate it. And that's what happens at these kinds of events. Ben Love, the banker, Mr. Banker, Texas Commerce Bank, he leans over to me at the Houston Club and said, would you like to be on my board? Okay, I've been on some boards. Yeah, that's fine. But they do it because they trust you as a mentor in the community and a civic leader. They don't do it because they've looked at your resume. They don't do it because of happy talk that you hear at networking meetings. A lot of times people chatter, but they don't tell you what they've done before. They tell you what they want you to pay them to do. And so Ben Love one time turns to me and says, you want to be on my board? I said, okay, I'll think about it. As the synergy would have it, one of his board members by the name of Lady Bird Johnson calls me up a couple of days later. I guess they had a campaign going and said, I need you to serve out the rest of my term on his board. She was having health problems in the later part of her life. And so I found myself on their board at the time they were negotiating the merger with Chase. So when you're in the meetings knowing, and I'd already advised many corporate roll-ups, so it was easy as a member of the board, and that's what those of you in the Asian Chamber, and one of the best ones, one of my favorite people in the world, Jack, is here. They contribute more and more and more, not only on their time to the chamber, but because of their expertise in business. And many of the other folks that are here are doing some magnificent things. That's the fiber of community life. A few years ago, I was recruited into the Leadership Houston program by Beth Wolf, and she I remember when I went over to her office the first time, she jokingly said, you answer the next 3 questions before I ask them. I mean, I knew to offer more rather than less about loving and caring about the community. And I have seen Beth do so much for so many organizations. She and I did an event for Martha Wong once. It was a City of Houston anniversary party, and we co-chaired that committee. And I just, Beth is one of these people that anytime she's involved in it, it's going to be worthwhile. And her company, Beth Wolf Realtors, is one of the primo in the world. She wants me to do a Legends event for them in the fall. And she and the company are just as sterling wonderful as they can be. And what makes them more sterling and wonderful is not just knowing the real estate industry, but it's knowing the fiber of the community. So please welcome my longtime friend, Beth Wolf. And Mr. Glenn Gondo is here too, the Sushi King. Those of you who were at the Asian Chamber banquet, which is the big event going on right now, the next one is coming up this weekend over at the Bayou City Events Center. Last year, Glenn was one of the honorees, but I've thought of him as an honoree for over 35 years. In fact, the next to the last meal my father and I ever had was at his restaurant in 1982. My father died later that year, and we went. My father had served in Japan both in the end of the war and during the occupation period. Fell in love with the Japanese culture. So as a kid, I grew up with my family in Austin, Texas, which is not a town known for diversity. I've said worse, but I better not since we're on video. Interstate 35 was, is, and always will be, unfortunately, the dividing line in Austin. When I grew up, we entertained foreign exchange students from all over the world. Many of them were Japanese students because my father was really good at cooking and really good. So I grew up with one of the few families in Austin, Texas, where they knew how to make sushi and other dishes too. And Glenn, at one point, I guess his land down on West Hammer got so valuable that it became commercial, and he's taken the Tokyo Gardens expertise literally all over the world. And he was honored at the Asian Chamber a while back last year, in part, and he was also honored with a G7 award, deservedly so, for developing the sushi. Anytime you go into an H-E-B store and you get sushi, which we all should, it's from Glenn Gondo. Please welcome Glenn Gondo. And Dan Parsons, got to say a word or two. Love Dan Parsons, have for years. Not just because we're old radio people. And that was a whole other world in its own. And the only one, most of the time that I was in radio way back then, I got to talk in my regular voice, with the exception when I talked about KILT, the big 610. And that hurts your gut to talk that way. That's back when DJs, but then after that, I was at Magic 102, where we whispered everything. Magic 102. There's an art to that too. That was back that's a 70s thing. Anyway, Dan is the best friend that business ever has had if they'll only listen and follow the ethical direction. He's also the best friend that consumers have. And guess what? Everybody over there on his staff and on his very active board of directors, including Linda Toyota, are the best and brightest. And so when you go into meetings at the BBB, like I frequently do, you hear the level of caring about the business beyond. I mean, as much as some of us grumble about poor customer service in our society, it doesn't exist among BBB members. They're the best because they want to be. Please welcome Dan Parsons. And if you get the book, which you should, because you're going to get it for the wholesale rate. This is not about the money. This is a very expensive book to produce. At the end of this, I'm going to be back there signing copies, and I'm going to ask my good friends, the legends, to also sign. And you will be getting signatures from I've done events like this before. Years ago, I chaired an event for Mayor Whitmire. It was called the Houston Mayor's Salute to Public Officials, and we also had the Houston Mayor's Salute to the space industry. And when we did the public officials salute, we had every former mayor of Houston up until that point We had some political people. The big names we had there signing autographs were John Connolly and Lady Bird Johnson. And as luck would have it, the night we had that event, this was a charity fundraiser for diabetes research, the Democratic candidates for president happened to be in town in the debates at the Alley Theater, and they all heard about our event, so they came over, and among those who came over to sign autographs at our table were Al Gore, Joe Biden, and some of those other names. So I got the pleasure of introducing Al Gore to Lady Bird Johnson for the first time. But were you to get the book, on about page 3, you will see the dedication to Joan Wilhelm, my fiance. And a couple of pages later, you see the dedications to all these wonderful people. A couple of quick things the take-backs I would say about history, because there is so much history there. One of the chapters that I did in there, I think it's chapter 7, was an idea that I stole from one of my earlier books. I did another city book a few years ago. I don't think I've ever spoken about that book to this chamber. The city that I wrote the book about was one you may have heard of called Hollywood, California. And it was called The Classic Television Reference. That was my second bestseller, and that's the one that got me on Oprah. And I was on Oprah with a bunch of old-timer TV stars, Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch, Ed Asner from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Leslie Nielsen, and we were sitting around talking about the good old days and all of that. But the good old days, and that's why when I write books, every other one is a serious business book. My High Cost of Doing Nothing book and my Business Tree book are serious business strategy. And down the road, after I do one more Legends book, will be the book I've been trying to write for 40 years, which is on corporate ethics. Then I get to use the word Enron. Nasty word. And by the way, I knew it was a nasty word in 1984 when my friend from the board of directors circuit, Ben Love, said, "There's this new guy. Would you meet with him and tell me what you think?" So I met with him and didn't think very highly and told my friends downtown. And I said, this company's in for trouble. That was 1984, and I learned one of the lessons I learned from one of my old mentors named A.D. Marks. A.D. Marks used to say, well, you can't afford to be right too soon. There is one of the chapters in the book has quotes from famous Houstonians, including Beyonce, including Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon. That's the other thing, and Kenny Rogers and all these other great names. There are more people that have had a connection to Houston than you would think. When I was talking with my New York publisher, all of my books have been New York published, they're not self-published. Those non-consultants that I'm talking about, put enough of those self-published ones out. But when I was talking with my New York publisher, I asked the question point blank, what is the attraction of Houston to a national and international market? And my publisher said, do you not understand that it is one of the capitals of the world? I said, well, it's not London. It's not Paris, it's not New York, it's not Rome. They said, but right after that. It's right up there with and ahead of San Francisco, New Orleans, where Joan and I were 2 days ago. I spoke at a convention down there. There's some great cities. As an advisor to companies, I have advised several cities in their visioning programs. One was the city of Dallas, one was the city of Phoenix, one was the city of San Diego, one was Syracuse, and the other one, which I'm particularly proud of, was Littleton, Colorado. I was the guy who helped them with their comeback strategy after the Columbine shootings. And this is a really great city because of energy, because of medicine, because of technology, because of the arts. But you know the main reason? It keeps going back to nonprofit service and community service. That is the thread that weaves all of us. And one of the things that I recommend when people do their strategic plans is give us a cause-related marketing plan. Show us what you do for the community, when you do it. You don't have to give everything away. Make it good for business, ... and it's the right thing to do. And that's the lesson that I learned from Mrs. Wortham and all of those characters umpteen years ago. If they believe in you, I believe in this organization. I remember after the last time I spoke to this chamber, Linda asked me to speak to a coalition of about 16 or 17 other Asian chambers. We had it over at AT&T, and it was a nice function. And the objective was to give everybody good creative ways of working together. That's what this organization symbolizes. That's what this community symbolizes. This community is not one community. It is a collection of communities, and it's made better by people who learn to work together. As I said at the beginning, we're all strangers from somewhere. We were at one time. I was a stranger from Austin, Texas, and I was here to help remake the University of Houston. I didn't need to remake it. It was a great institution then, still is. Last thing I would say is the great answers to business are right in front of our noses. That's why you need good mentors to help you just kind of change things a little bit and give a different perspective. And that's what I do, that's what Jack does, that's what Dan does, that's what David Scheim does. We're there to help the company be their best. We're not peddling products to them. Those of us who advise companies are doing it because we want them to win. I've been involved with BBB as a judge in their awards program, and they're getting ready to give them again on May 13th. We go in wanting every single, Dan doesn't know who the winners are. He's not allowed to know. I know. Can't remember the list right now, but I can remember everything Linda Wortham ever said to me in 1974. And Ben Love, and that terrible lunch that I had with Ken Lay in 1984. He said to me, I was talking about nonprofit. He says, that's great for people like you and Ben Love, but I'm going to do things differently. I said, well, you can't. And he said to me one question, how do I buy instant credibility? And I said, you don't. You earn it the old-fashioned way. And it wasn't just a matter of hearing it from I'm a hog. It was being brought up by parents who taught me better. And again, it's that potlatch thing. So being here today is potlatch for me because I'm enjoying your wonderful open reception. And I know you'll want to come back to the back of the room and get a copy of the book. By the way, with the book today, a free Asian Chamber bonus is you will get the Houston Legends CD. And that includes Love You Blue and Garner State Park and all those old things from the good old days, back when people loved the blue. And the Houston Legends TV collection. And you'll see my friends Ron Stone and all the gang again. We have footage from Eyes of Texas. I welcome each and every one of you for coming today because you're going to be the legends of the future. That's what this whole Legends thing about. It's not just looking philosophically at the past. It's not important that you even knew who the people were. It's that you learned their secrets. And I learned some secrets about class and charm from our wonderful VIPs here today, still do all the time, including Linda Toyota. I still learn, and Catherine Lee, I still learn good lessons about charm and class from them because class is as class does. That's a joking line Mrs. Wortham and I used to say. When we talked about the University of Houston. She used to jokingly say in meetings, and I thought, she's got the money to say it, I can't. She used to say, well, Cougar High is as Cougar High does. That's not a politically correct term to use anymore, and the younger people don't even know the term. But when, instead of calling something Mickey Mouse, they called it Cougar High. And I kept saying, stop it. This is one of the greatest institutions of the world. This can't be a carbon copy of my college, which was UT Austin. It has to be its own best. And you've got programs. I'll tell you one last, and this has got to be the last story. One of the legends was George Mitchell. He just died about a year and a half ago. His book, his endorsement is on the back cover of the book. George Mitchell was the visionary of the Woodlands. He was the visionary of renovating downtown Galveston because he was an old Galveston guy. The only time that I ever heard the word bulldoze from the great visionary George Mitchell was during that first year when I lived here and I was working at the age of 25. So he comes into the office one day with some of the other board members, including Mrs. Hobby and Ms. Wortham, and he says, we've been talking with you. We want you to tell us how to allocate our money. And I laughed. I said, I'm still 25 and my scope of work keeps changing. I'd have been working there for a few days and I was already the liaison with the Board of Regents. So I said, look, you need to make this institution not UT Austin. It's got to be its own best, not a carbon copy of what the other guys did. He said, give me a couple of examples. So we turned our chairs around, we're looking down the mall, and I said, you see that building? That's the Hilton College of Hotel and Restaurant Management, which had just been built. That's world class. I said, my guys in Austin don't have that. And they didn't until a few years ago. The AT&T Center is a copy of the success of the Hilton College at University of Houston. And then to one of the others said, well, what's that building over there? And I said, that's the College of Optometry. That's world class. My guys in Austin don't have it. The Aggies don't have it. And Mitchell said, I think I'm understanding. We need to emphasize on what sets us ahead rather than live in someone else's shadow. And they said, by the way, what's that ugly old building over there? That barn-looking structure? I mean, great visionaries really do use street talk once in a while. He said, what is that ugly old building? Should we bulldoze it? And I said, no, sir. You need to give them a whole bunch of money. I don't know what they do there. It's called the College of Technology, and something tells me that's related to the future. We're talking 1973, right? And I later got to tell Dr. Paul Chu that story, and he laughed uproariously. Yeah, technology is part of the future. Even in 1973 it was. But I didn't know what they did then, you know. I didn't learn how to type on a computer for another 12 years after that. But we do things at different ages. We grow, we become our community. When I worked in politics years ago I was never a politician, I was a policy guy. When I worked with LBJ, he used to say, come let us reason together. And of course, the subtexture of that message was by the end of the meeting, you'd leave the meeting with his point of view. But it's got to be working together. Houston, and that would be my best wish, that Houston starts thinking of itself as a legend and not as in the shadows of Dallas or anywhere else. I advised the city of Dallas in their visioning program, and I can assure you the word Houston never came up. Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned all of these drivers of business, etc., except for the ship channel.
It's a big one. They're in there. They're all in there. They're all there. Ship channel, the entire reason that every community, and that's a good point, and that you can't look at Houston without looking at the neighboring communities. The last thing I wrote on that book, when I finished that book about a year ago before I sent it off to, and Joan remembers, we were sitting there, I was saying, what's missing? Well, you can't do the history of Houston without doing all the other cast of characters. So I went out in a 4-county range, and they're all in there. Tom Ball, which was actually named for a person named Thomas Ball. Kingwood, which was a joint venture of the King Ranch and Friendswood Development Company. Missouri City, because a bunch of land promoters in St. Louis wanted to sell land. Sometimes the answers are so simple. Port of Houston is one of the 3 real reasons that this and every other community in a 4-county scope were founded. A, they all sat on Indian reservations, and settlers came in and needed to have trading posts to deal in dry goods. And some of the old retailers such as Fingers and Star Furniture and all of those older retailers that are in the retail chapter, they all started out as trading posts. Even Sackowitz started out as a trading post in Galveston. Common thread of all 3 communities in this area, there was business and commerce. It was about small business and opportunity. Secondarily, they were all on the path of Texas independence. You can look in the book and determine where Sam Houston and his troops camped, which night they spent the night in spring, when they spent the night on 1960. In fact, when I was out at the Northwest Chamber last month doing this talk for them, I reminded them that 2 nights before he went to San Jacinto to beat Santa Ana, General Houston and his troops camped right up there off of 1960, within blocks of where we were. Third final reason that every community in this area is robust, it's the shipping of goods and services to the sea. So you're really talking here about 3 main reasons that all of these communities came along. One of them had to do with the Port of Houston, and that's why it's a robust thing that we all need to champion. And then of course there were the railroads, there were all these other aspects, and there's not a lot of time to go into all of that. I learned a lot of history. I lived through a lot of history. I met a lot of legends, including these wonderful guests today. And I did a lot of research too. And the other common thread, I just mentioned the big 3, and it's the last thing I'll say, is nonprofit community involvement is the backbone of everything. A lot of those community leaders used to live next door to each other downtown, back when there were houses downtown. And they worked together, they lived together, they served the community together. They literally leaned over the table and said, hey, I want you to start a business unit for me. You just tell me what you need to do. Why a wise old man like George R. Brown would say that to a 28-year-old kid? I mean, I'd been working 18 years at that point, but it was all about community trust. And yeah, we're in a robust economy, despite what it's easy to say doom and gloom and to say let's bulldoze the Astrodome, just like George Mitchell said, let's bulldoze the College of Technology. I think not. There's great opportunities there. People would say, are our best years behind us? No. I would have loved to have known Jesse Jones and George R. Herman and William Morris Rice. They were all really neat people. But they were all before our time, but there's no reason we can't learn about them. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the potlatch of sharing your wonderful interest, not just in history, but how it relates to the future. Thank you very much.